The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged cliffs when the rancher, Samuel, wiped the sweat from his brow. The ranch had always been quiet, almost too quiet for his liking. He liked the solitude most days, but sometimes it felt as if the wind itself whispered stories he could not understand. That evening, as he leaned against the wooden fence, listening to the gentle lowing of the cattle, a sudden cloud of dust rose from the distant canyon. At first, Samuel thought it might be a herd of wild horses. But as the dust cleared, he could make out figures tall, moving steadily through the haze. There were 3 of them. As they drew closer, Samuel felt a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. He had never seen anyone so tall in his life, and even from a distance, their presence seemed to fill the space around them. They moved with confidence, yet there was a grace that caught his eye. Each carried a small bundle, but it was clear they were self-sufficient. Riding slightly ahead of them was an older man, dressed in traditional Apache clothing. His face was stern, with deep lines carved by years of sun and wind. He rode with purpose, every motion deliberate, commanding attention without a word. Samuel felt his heartbeat quicken. He had heard stories of Apache chiefs, but he had never imagined meeting one so far from the reservation. The chief stopped abruptly a few yards away from Samuel. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the dry earth, and looked straight into Samuel's eyes. His voice was calm, yet firm, carrying an authority that made Samuel straighten instinctively. "You're going to marry them," the chief said, gesturing toward the 3 sisters standing quietly behind him. Samuel blinked. He thought he had misheard. But no. The words were clear. I don't understand," he stammered. "Marry them? What do you mean?" The chief did not elaborate. His gaze was unwavering, and after a long pause, he nodded toward the sisters. "Take care of my daughters," he said simply. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse and rode back toward the canyon, leaving Samuel staring at the 3 women in disbelief. The sisters did not move immediately. They stood silently, observing him with calm eyes, their height and posture both intimidating and striking. Samuel's mind raced. How could he possibly take care of 3 adult women, let alone marry them, as the chief commanded? And yet, there was something in the way they looked at him, respectful, but expectant, that made it hard to dismiss the command entirely. Finally, one of the sisters stepped forward. She was the tallest, with dark eyes that seemed to see straight into Samuel's thoughts. "We will stay where you tell us," she said softly, her voice steady. "We only ask for shelter and food." Samuel swallowed hard. You can stay in the barn for now," he said finally. "I don't have much, but it's safe." He led them across the yard, opening the barn doors with a creak. The sisters walked in carefully, their long strides taking up more space than he expected. They examined the barn as if sizing it up, moving hay bales effortlessly and noting the best place for their bundles. Samuel felt both impressed and intimidated. These women were not ordinary. Their strength and confidence were beyond anything he had encountered. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. Samuel sat on the porch, staring into the fire pit, listening to the soft murmurs from the barn. He could hear them settling in, arranging their small space with care. He found himself worrying, what if he had misunderstood the chief? What if this was a test, or worse, a joke he was ill-prepared for? The thought made him uneasy, but he could not deny a growing curiosity. Who were these women? Really? What kind of life had they led before arriving here? The next morning, Samuel was awakened by the sound of activity. The sisters were already outside, helping with the cattle and stacking hay. Their movements were precise and efficient, and they worked together as if they had been doing this all their lives. Samuel could not help but watch, fascinated. Their strength was remarkable. They lifted hay bales with ease, guided the cattle without effort, and even managed to repair a broken fence with skill he had never seen in anyone else. Despite his initial shock, Samuel felt a grudging respect growing inside him. These women were not just imposing figures, they were intelligent, capable, and self-reliant. And yet, there was a gentleness in their actions, a care that extended even to the smallest tasks around the ranch. It was clear that they were not here to cause trouble. They had been sent for a purpose he could not yet understand. As the day went on, Samuel tried to converse with them, but the sisters spoke little of themselves. They answered his questions politely but offered no personal stories. It was frustrating and intriguing all at once. He began to sense that there was more to their presence than the chief had revealed. There was a quiet dignity in how they moved, a sense of family tradition that he did not fully comprehend. By afternoon, Samuel realized he needed to make a decision. Could he really provide for these women? Could he navigate the unknown expectations the chief had left behind? He walked the fields, thinking through the possibilities. It was not just about food or shelter. It was about respect, trust, and understanding. And despite his uncertainty, he felt a strange pull, a sense that accepting this challenge might change him in ways he could not yet imagine. That evening, as the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Samuel sat on the porch again. He watched the sisters from a distance as they worked together to gather firewood. Their laughter was soft but musical, carrying across the yard. For the first time, he noticed small details, the way one sister would glance back to make sure the others were following, the way another adjusted a branch to make it easier to carry, the shared understanding in their gestures. Samuel felt a mix of admiration and awe. These were not ordinary women. They were remarkable in every sense. He began to see that his role was not simply to obey the chief's command, but to understand the lives and traditions of these sisters. There was a responsibility here that went beyond himself, beyond the ranch, beyond his solitary life. As night fell, the sisters sat quietly in the barn, sharing whispered conversations in their native language. Samuel could not understand the words, but he could sense the bond they shared. The unspoken connection of family, tradition, and trust. He realized then that this was not just about him or them. It was about learning, adapting, and embracing something completely new. The days that followed were filled with small, surprising lessons. Samuel began to notice the sisters' subtle ways of helping, how they anticipated problems with the livestock, how they made tasks easier with clever solutions, how they respected the land and its creatures in ways he had never considered. He began to feel that perhaps the chief had chosen wisely. Perhaps this unexpected turn in his life was not a burden, but a gift. By the end of the week, Samuel had made a quiet decision. He would not run from this responsibility. He would not dismiss the sisters as mere strangers or guests. He would learn from them, work with them, and, in time, understand what the chief had seen in him that made him worthy of this trust. The barn, once empty and silent, had become a place of life and movement. The sisters had brought strength, skill, and laughter to the ranch. And Samuel, though still overwhelmed, felt a spark of something he had not felt in years: hope, curiosity, and a sense of belonging. As he closed the barn doors that night, he overheard snippets of conversation in their language. Words he did not understand, but tones of warmth and trust were clear. A quiet realization settled in his heart. Life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined, and he would have to rise to meet it. Samuel went to bed that night with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He had no idea how this arrangement would unfold, but he knew one thing for certain: he could not turn back now. The Apache sisters were here, and their presence demanded courage, patience, and an open heart. And as the wind whispered through the canyon, Samuel closed his eyes, ready for whatever the future held. The days turned into weeks, and Samuel slowly began to adjust to life with the three sisters. The ranch, once quiet and predictable, had become a place of movement, laughter, and unexpected lessons. Samuel had learned early that trying to control everything was impossible. The sisters had their own ways of doing things, and their strength, skill, and intelligence made even the toughest ranch work seem effortless. He watched them as they went about their routines, lifting hay bales with ease, mending fences, and guiding the cattle with a skill he had never seen before. It was humbling. Samuel realized that life on the ranch had become easier, yet more complex at the same time. The sisters were not simply helpers. They were partners, each contributing in their own unique way. One morning, as the sun rose over the canyon, Samuel found himself standing beside the tallest sister, Ayanna. While she tended to the animals, she noticed his gaze and smiled, a small but genuine gesture that made him feel both welcome and awkward at the same time. "You have learned quickly," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth. "But there is much more to understand. Our ways are different, but the land teaches all who listen." Samuel nodded, unsure how to respond. He had begun to understand that this was not just about chores or survival. It was about respect, trust, and the blending of two very different worlds. Each sister had her own personality. Ayanna was wise and calm, often offering guidance without forcing it. The middle sister, Nayeli, had a quick smile and a playful nature, lightening even the hardest days with laughter. The youngest, Sanaya, was quiet and observant, noticing details that Samuel would have missed, often suggesting solutions before he even realized a problem existed. Life on the ranch slowly transformed. Samuel found himself waking earlier, preparing meals for the sisters, and listening more than he spoke. He began to notice the subtle ways in which they cared for him, offering small gestures of consideration, a warm blanket on a chilly morning, a careful repair of his boots, or simply a shared moment of quiet companionship. Neighbors began to take notice of the unusual arrangement. Some were skeptical, whispering about the giant sisters and the rancher who had suddenly become their guardian. Samuel ignored the gossip, focusing instead on the work and the growing bond he shared with the sisters. He realized that their presence had changed him, teaching him patience, humility, and the value of trust. One afternoon, as a storm approached from the distant mountains, Samuel worked alongside the sisters to secure the animals and reinforce the barn. The wind picked up, carrying dust and rain, but together they moved with purpose and coordination. It was during this storm that Samuel truly saw the strength of their bond, not just with him, but with each other. They worked without complaint, supporting one another, and even during the most chaotic moments, their teamwork was seamless. After the storm passed, the sisters gathered by the fire, drying off and sharing a quiet meal. Samuel sat nearby, watching them with a sense of awe. He realized that their presence had transformed his lonely ranch into a home filled with life and warmth. He also began to feel something he had never expected: deep admiration, and perhaps even affection, for these extraordinary women. Over time, the sisters shared more of their culture with him. They taught him songs from their childhood, stories of their people, and traditions that had been passed down through generations. Samuel listened intently, fascinated by the richness of their heritage. In turn, he shared stories of his own life, his struggles, and his dreams. Though words were not always enough, a mutual understanding grew, bridging the gap between two very different worlds. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Samuel walked with Nayeli along the ridge that overlooked the ranch. The sky was painted with orange and pink hues, and the air was warm with the lingering scent of the desert. "You've learned more than you realize," Nayeli said, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You respect the land and us, and that is why we trust you." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. It was one thing to care for the sisters out of duty. It was another to realize that trust had been placed in him willingly. "I never thought I would understand all of this," he admitted. The sisters' presence brought unexpected joy to Samuel's life. He found himself laughing more, appreciating the small moments, and even looking forward to the future in ways he had never imagined. He began to see that family could be created in many ways, and that love and respect were not bound by convention. Challenges continued to arise. Harsh weather, a wandering herd of cattle, and occasional injuries tested their teamwork and resolve. Yet, each obstacle was met with patience, collaboration, and unwavering support. Samuel realized that the sisters had not only made his work easier, but had also strengthened his character, teaching him resilience and courage. One night, as the stars filled the sky, Samuel sat by the fire with Sania, sharing stories of his childhood. She listened carefully, her eyes wide and thoughtful. Then, she told him a story of their people, a tale of honor, loyalty, and bravery. Samuel felt a deep respect for the sisters and the legacy they carried. It was clear that the chief had not left them with him by chance. He had chosen a man he believed could uphold their values and care for them with integrity. Weeks turned into months. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Crops grew strong. The cattle were healthy, and the land seemed to respond to their care. Samuel no longer felt the isolation that had once defined his life. The sisters had brought companionship, strength, and wisdom. The ranch had become a true home, filled with laughter, hard work, and mutual respect. Samuel also began to understand the meaning behind the chief's command. It was not simply about marriage in the traditional sense, but about partnership, honor, and trust. The sisters had taught him that family could be chosen, nurtured, and respected in ways that transcended convention. He had learned to embrace responsibility, to listen, and to act with compassion and courage. As the seasons changed, Samuel noticed how deeply he had come to care for the sisters, not just as guests or wards, but as integral parts of his life. He admired their strength, their wisdom, and their gentle spirits. He respected them for the women they were, and he recognized the gift they had brought into his life. One quiet evening, the sisters gathered around the fire, and Samuel joined them. They shared stories, laughter, and the warmth of companionship. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it a sense of peace and belonging. Samuel realized that he had found something he had never sought, but had always needed: a true family. Bound not only by circumstance, but by choice, respect, and care. He thought of the chief, who had left the sisters in his care, and he understood at last. The chief had entrusted him with more than just the safety of his daughters. He had entrusted him with their happiness, their well-being, and the continuation of their traditions. Samuel felt honored, humbled, and determined to live up to that trust. Life continued on the ranch, filled with challenges and triumphs, laughter and quiet reflection. Samuel, once a solitary man, had discovered the value of connection, the power of trust, and the joy of shared life. The sisters had transformed not only his ranch but his heart and his understanding of family, love, and responsibility. And so, under the vast skies of the Southwest, the rancher and the three sisters lived together, growing stronger, wiser, and closer with each passing day. The barn, once a simple shelter, had become a symbol of resilience, partnership, and the unexpected ways in which life can change when one is willing to embrace the unknown. Samuel knew that challenges would continue to come, but he was no longer alone. Together, they faced the future with courage, respect, and the unspoken understanding that family could be created through trust, care, and love. The chief's command had brought them together, but it was the bonds they had built themselves that had truly made them a family. And in that quiet, vast desert, under the endless sky, Samuel smiled. Life had given him an unexpected gift, the gift of companionship, understanding, and a family that was bound not by blood alone, but by heart, honor, and trust.